Okay. Yes, we are recording, Eva. And if you ask Susan really nicely, maybe she'll agree to send you a recording. Are we recording already?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, welcome everyone to the second semester of Bar-Ilan University, Department of Jewish Arts, our departmental seminar uh, online. This is our first talk of the second semester, and we're very honored to uh, to host Susan Nashman Fryman. Uh, Dr. Susan Nashman Fryman is an independent researcher and curator of both Jewish and Israeli arts. Her Hebrew doctorate was on the topic of the hanging Sabbath lamp, soon to be published as an English book. She served for 5 years as the collection manager of the Yad Vashem Art Museum. She has curated exhibitions of Israeli arts, and she serves on the advisory committee of the Jerusalem Biennale. Her writing can be accessed at artinisrael.net. So without further ado, welcome, Susan.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks everybody. First of all, I want to thank Professor Mor Preciado, Lior, and Tzvi for inviting me to talk at the seminar. I've spoken before at the seminars, but they've always been in person. This is the first time I'm doing it by Zoom. So I also want to thank everyone who's attending for coming, and I'm delighted really to be here. I also want at this juncture to thank people at the Israel Museum, Rachel Sarfati, Sharon Weiser, Hila Manor of the Israel Museum for letting me see items in their collection, and Maya Mosek of Muza of the Eretz Yisrael Museum for giving me access as well. Without this access, this research really wouldn't have been possible. So thank you very much. Okay, the Sabbath lamp of Morocco. Okay, this is a work in progress. As you heard from Lior, I'm planning to publish my doctorate as a book, Bezrat Hashem, please God, in the next year. But I felt that in order to fully discuss the subject, I had to widen the area of research and not only focus on Ashkenaz, which was the subject of my doctorate, but to speak also about Edot HaMizrach, North Africa, and points east. Just as I discovered that there is just as I discovered that there is a unique vessel for lighting the Sabbath lamp, and you see a picture of it in front of you now. This is in a private collection in Israel. I wanted to know, is there a unique vessel that was used by the Jews of North Africa and points east? And I'm focused today on Morocco because Morocco seemed to have the most material. One of the things that Lior said to me as we were getting ready for the lectures, he was looking at my first image. He said, Susan, there is no lamp. Where is the Shabbos lamp in that picture? And the fact of the matter is there isn't. There's a paucity of documentation, which has made this research very challenging. And as a result, I'm delighted to be presenting it as a work in progress to see also if people have some information that they can share with me to help flesh out the research. Okay, here you see the well-known hanging Sabbath lamp of Ashkenaz. It's called oftentimes in the literature the Judenstern, but that's not a term that was used by Jewish people. Okay, that's a term that came from outside. But this was this special lamp you see here is an oil lamp. The oil would be poured from the center shaft, which was hollow, and would fill the star-shaped bowls that you see here. In this case, this lamp has 8. Most lamps have 6 to 8 points on them. And you see the little bowl beneath that little bowl actually does catch the oil that I learned while I was doing this experiment that you see here, where I actually lit the lamp to see how long it would stay burnt, how long it would stay lit. So the question is, how did this lamp develop? And when I started the research, people said to me, don't be disappointed if you discover that the Sabbath lamp was really just a kind of domestic lamp that was used in the home. And actually, we know that there are precedents for this. I mean, take a look at this Kiddush cup. This is on display at the Israel Museum, or it's in the collection of the Israel Museum. This is a silver Kiddush cup. And as you see, it's very plain. This one's not particularly decorated, but there's nothing particularly Jewish about this Kiddush cup. Now, you might say, well, it might hold a certain amount because we know that to say blessing on wine, there's a certain amount that has to be drunk. Okay, a certain amount has to be in the cup. So that might be the Jewish element of it, but from a design point of view, as you see here in this catalog from Warsaw 1900, the Kiddush cups that we are familiar with are very similar to silver vessels, or these are silver plate vessels that were sold in the countries where the Jews lived in Europe. So in other words, and these vessels were mostly not made by Jews. So it's not surprising that it was thought that the Sabbath lamp was probably a borrowing from the local culture. The same, by the way, goes for the goblets that we're familiar with that the Chevra Kadisha used. For instance, this is also in the Israel Museum collection. These are actually very large glass beakers. They were communal beakers. They were used by the Chevra Kadisha after fasting on the 7th of Adar, which is the day of Moses's passing. They had a traditional feast after the fast. It was an honorary society. It was considered a great honor to be a member of the Chevra Kadisha. And while you can see here, this glass is decorated with Hebrew and depictions of the funeral procession and the members of the Chevra Kadisha in Jewish dress of Prague at the time. Here you see a similar beaker, similar size glass beaker, this one from Germany. So you see here the form was a local form that was adopted for Jewish use. So while the phenomenon of the beakers is fascinating in the texts and so forth, but the actual form was taken from local usage. Now, what led to the development of the star-shaped lamp? And this, I'm not going to go over all my research on this, but I want to just talk about home lighting. When I did my research, one of the questions that you have to ask yourself when you're doing this kind of research is, what were the local implements for lighting? In other words, if the Jews are using the star-shaped lamp, is that what everyone is using? And how did this lamp develop? So, B'kitzur Nimratz, in a shortened version, I will say that home lighting started from small ceramic clay vessels, which we'll see in a minute, but later expanded to other kinds of vessels, including these large glass hanging vessels, which in Hebrew are called ashashiot, or called float lamps. And these were lamps that would have oil in them. These particular lamps are from the 5th, as you see, 5th or 7th century, and they actually have a place for the wick. But most of the lamps would be filled with water and only then a layer of oil. And these generated more light than the small ceramic lamps that we're familiar with from so many archaeological digs here in Israel. So home lighting did develop over time. And we know about the use of the ashashit, or the glass lamp, in Jewish homes in Europe, because Rashi mentions it and also Rabbeinu Tam mentions it. But what people did, so you can say, well, these are just lamps. Everyone was using them, and they were just using them on the Sabbath. Don't forget also, and this is a very short summary, the Sabbath lamp had to provide light for the entire Sabbath, right? It could not be extinguished. It had to stay lit for a very long time. And it was a major source of light. The Sabbath lamp, when you look at responsa from the Middle Ages, you will find that the lamps were lit in several rooms. The question was, on which lamp do you make the blessing? So there was one lamp, which was the designated lamp for the blessing, but the woman's role was actually to light lamps in several rooms and not just where the meal was. So this also speaks of a transition or an evolution in Sabbath lighting, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Anyway, these glass lamps, these ashashiot, are not depicted in Jewish manuscripts. We'll talk about that in a minute. But one thing we do know is that in order to distinguish between lighting for every day and lighting for Shabbat, is that the women, and appears in Rabbeinu Tam, the women would extinguish the lamps and then relight them before the Sabbath. And this necessity of showing that the lamp was explicitly lit for the Sabbath is probably what led to the development of a specific vessel that was used just on the Sabbath. Now we know in the case of Ashkenaz, we know that there's the it's Ashkenaz. I have a lot of sources on the lamps. Rabbis write about the lamps. They are depicted in manuscripts. Here's an example. Of course, many of you are familiar with the Second Nuremberg Haggadah. We see the lamp. This lamp is quite big. Whether this is proportional, I can't tell you. No lamps have survived from that period. Okay, none of the lamps. Metal is constantly being reused, resmelted, and used for all kinds of things. So until they scientifically discovered the composition of brass as opposed to bronze, metal was constantly being remelted. So these lamps did not survive. These early medieval lamps did not survive. So here we have an image, though, of a hanging star-shaped lamp with a bowl over the Pesach Seder table. Here we have another depiction from the Ashkenazi Haggadah in the British Library. Again, very charming depiction. And here we see more clearly the star-shaped lamp and the drip bowl. Do you see my arrow, by the way? Do you see an arrow? Yeah. Okay. All right. So that is the Ashkenazi Haggadah. So we have visual, and we also see it, by the way, in the Chilik and Bilik Haggadah. All of these are from around the same time, similar locales, okay? Here you see the Lefichach, and by the way, here, the drawings also have an educational role. In Lefichach and the Passover Seder, as many of you might remember, at that point, we are encouraged to lift our cup. And here too, the figures are sitting around the table, they are all lifting their cups. So it's a visual instruction. So there's also the depiction of the lamp here is also to, I think, an attempt at showing something that was a real element of the Seder table, even though we also have the fanciful element of the monkey playing the trumpet up here. Now, as time went on, the lamps developed. Different places had different kinds of oil lamps. And I just want to mention here, again, this is all part of the long exposition of how the history of the Shabbat lamp, but some of you might be aware that on Friday evening in the prayer service, we recite certain Mishnayot, certain Mishnahs, which in the series called Bema Madlikin. What oils with what materials are we permitted to light? And so the emphasis is on oil. The best material, the best lighting fuel, if you will, is olive oil, pure olive oil. And that was, of course, used in the temple. So we know that up until the modern period, up until the 19th century, Jewish communities in Europe were using oil. Were they all using olive oil? No. Okay, for a variety of reasons. But most communities, with the exception of Poland, and we're not going to be touching on that so much today, most communities were using oil lamps. So here you see a lamp. This is depicted, and my teacher, Professor Shalom Sabar, has written about this image. But here you see the woman lighting. These are the 3 mitzvot of women, and here she's lighting the Sabbath lamp. And the lamp that you see here is more like one of these lamps that are from Amsterdam. That the lamps used in Amsterdam were more open stars, if you will. They weren't quite as pointed as the Ashkenazi lamp that I showed you previously. They had much bigger oil reservoir, if you will, that you see here, very deep reservoir, both here and here. So to return to this lamp, how this lamp developed and became just the Sabbath lamp, you'll have to wait until my book comes out. But the point I want to make here is that a unique vessel developed, and we have a lot of sources about it. Okay, we have halachic sources, and we have visual sources, and we also have some remains. We have some objects that have remained mostly from the 18th century and onward. And we know that this lamp was specifically used for the Sabbath. Here's a beautiful proverb of the German Jews. When the lamp comes down, the worries go up. In other words, on Friday night, they would bring the lamp down to the table. It was on a ratchet, and it could be lowered close to the table. So we know that this lamp was specifically used for the Sabbath. So we know that in Ashkenaz, a specific Sabbath lamp developed. Okay, great. Where does that leave us with Edot HaMizrach, with North Africa, and so forth? By the way, I just want to say that from the beginning of the 19th century, Jews move away from lighting oil lamps, and the 2 candles that we are so familiar with become much more commonly used. We see it here in Isidor Kaufman's work here. And these are candlesticks displayed in the Israel Museum. These candlesticks, there's nothing inherently Jewish about these candlesticks. Having said that, there were manufacturers in Poland who did make specific candlesticks with Jewish themes. Again, I'm not going to talk about them, but mostly in the 19th century, the candlesticks were purchased from all kinds of silversmiths and goldsmiths, such as this beautiful example we see in the Jewish Museum collection in New York. There's nothing intrinsically Jewish about this, but the use that it was used for, and so forth. Now, I just want to mention here that as the 19th century progressed, there was more development in home lighting also. And so the function of lighting the home with the candles also went down. Here you see in this Chagall that's in Köln, that besides the candles, you see kerosene lamps in use in the home. So there were other lighting implements in the home, and the candlesticks became more of a symbolic usage and less to do with actual home lighting. Okay, so this brings me to one of my first research problems. Okay, first of all, what did the rabbis mean when they used the word ner? What is ner? Okay, in modern Hebrew today, ner is a candle. Ner is a candle. A candle is a wick with wax around it of some kind, right? But in Hebrew of that period and up until the Middle Ages, ner could mean a few things. It could mean a candle, by the way, it could mean a candle, but candles were rarer. It was more likely to mean a little oil lamp or a wick. So when the rabbis use the word ner, it's likely to mean small ceramic oil lamps with which we are familiar. Now here's one that's in the Israel Museum collection. This they found with the original wick. This is a very simple ceramic lamp, but this is the kind of lamp that was used in the ancient period and what the rabbis were most familiar with. These lamps, as you see, are quite small and they don't burn that long. And because they're ceramic, they don't last that long either. And they're constant. That's why we found them in the hundreds, because people constantly need to replenish them. So I brought this to show you that when the rabbis talk in the menorah, now this is one of the reconstructions of the temple menorah by the Temple Institute. We won't go into all the aspects of the reconstruction, okay? The base, as you know, is problematic. But the arms, in this depiction, they're going by the Shita, what's the word? The method of the Maimonides, of Rambam, where he says the branches were straight, okay? But we know, according to the Midrash, and of course this appears in Rashi, is that all the flames pointed to the middle. So how was that possible? They took the branches of the menorah actually had small little oil lamps on them, similar to the ceramic one, but of course made out of metal in this case. That's their depiction. And they would point them so that the wicks would all be to the middle. And that was how the flames went to the middle. Okay, by the way, when you see any menorahs like this made by Chabad uses this method of the straight branches. When they make their public Hanukkah lamps, they use the same approach. They take the same interpretation. But anyway, I brought this to show you that this is one of the issues about candlelighting in general, is what are the rabbis talking about? Okay, and this brings me first to Spain, because you can't get to Morocco without going through Spain. Okay, and here, and I wanted to bring you something actual from Spain, because unfortunately, while there are many very fine manuscripts that have survived from the Jews of Spain, the material remains from the Jews of Spain are very, what's the word? Very sparse, very sparse. Archaeological digs in Spain have only started in the last 20, 30 years. The remnants, besides the synagogues that are left, such as in Cordoba and in Toledo, the physical objects have not survived in great quantities from Spain. This is the Edict of Expulsion, and it's just interesting that it was issued in March of 1492, March 31st, 1492. This is the last copy that exists. It was sent, much like the Igeret Purim was sent to cities. It was also sent in many copies to different cities, but this is the only copy that has survived. Why did I bring it? Simply to bring something real that survived from the expulsion. Now, again, one of the questions or problems I've had is determining how many Jews lived in Spain, how many moved to Morocco. The numbers vary greatly. I've heard that there were 200,000 Jews in Spain before the expulsion. And I've heard that of those, about 20,000 made their way to Morocco. Most of them apparently went to Portugal first, and only from then, when Portugal issued its edict, they either converted or left from there. So I think that there's some disagreement or some lack of clarity about the numbers that we are talking about here. But many of the Jews in Morocco are descended from Jews in Spain. So in order to try to learn what the Jews in Morocco are doing, I tried to understand what the Jews in Spain were doing. Okay, this is, of course, the Sister Haggadah from Catalonia. And here you see, this is the reading of the Haggadah. This is reading in a synagogue or in a prayer space. It's not at the family table. And here you see many, many glass lamps hanging here, lighting the space. Okay, many glass lamps. And these are called float lamps. This is the ashashit that we hear about in the Talmud. And again, here this diagram shows you is a layer of water, a layer of oil, and then something that floats on the surface of the oil that holds the wick. And the beauty of this is that safety is self-extinguishing. In other words, when the oil is finished, the lamp goes out. Okay, so it's a safety feature, and also it's good for Shabbat. It works well on Shabbat. And here you see an example of one way of hanging such a lamp with these chains. And here in Lorca, where they've started doing excavations, you can see here glass lamps that they excavated from the site of what they think was the synagogue in Lorca in Spain from the 15th century. So here you see exactly what we saw in the illustration, the kind of glass lamps that were used in the synagogue. Now, in the same Sister Haggadah, on the following folio, you see a family sitting at a table reading the Haggadah. And here you see some kind of brass hanging lamps, okay? They do not look, but we don't know. They don't look like the star lamps. It looks like they just have two places for wicks on either side. And you can see that they're lit up because they have the little red, they're red here. Can everyone see that? It's red there. Okay, but we don't have any physical remnant of such lamps. We don't have. We're left to conjecture what might these lamps have been. One suggestion I have, but it's not at all enough, is this kind of a lamp that was used as eternal light in India. It's also a brass lamp, and it has two spouts here. And as opposed to having spouts on either side, it had two spouts here, but it was clearly designed for hanging. And maybe the lamps that were used in those homes were similar to this, but we don't know. We don't have any remnants. And this is a lamp that is used in Belmonte. Now, Belmonte is a community in Portugal that has a heritage of being a crypto-Jewish community, Jews who were living as Christians outwardly and continuing Jewish practices to the modern period. I don't know enough about Belmonte, but one thing I can tell you is that this lamp is quite small, as you see here. And there is nothing intrinsically Jewish about this lamp. The fact that they preserved it means, again, they preserved an old form of home lighting, because we see many lamps like this from the Von Benisch collection in Vienna this collection was formed at the end of the 19th century. Because what happened was, at the end of the 19th century, there was a big revolution in home lighting, and lighting in general in the 19th century, okay? First of all, the invention of the artificial candles, which we saw the move from oil lamps to candles among Jewish communities. And the reason for this is that the beeswax manufacture was in the hands of the church up until the modern period. So beeswax candles were expensive and had very strong Christian connotation. So the use of candles was much rarer in the Jewish communities up until the modern period. During the 19th century, it was discovered that you can do a chemical process on animal fat and separate out the smelly and the unpleasant part of the animal fat and make an artificial candle made out of stearine. And then later in the 19th century, they discovered paraffin, which was a byproduct of kerosene and the discovery of oil and the use of crude oil. So all of these led to the development of artificial candles, synthetic candles, that led to increased usages. And at that time, people started collecting all the old lighting implements that people were throwing away that they didn't use anymore. And that's the source of the Von Benisch collection in Vienna. It's a collection of old lighting implements that went completely out of use. It's like a museum of old computers or something like that, of an old technological vessels that were no longer in use. So here you can see in the Von Benisch collection some of these kind of lamps that are very similar to this little lamp that was used in Belmonte. So again, there's nothing intrinsically Jewish about this lamp. They had something that was in use for a long time, and they continued using it. Now, what I want to say about Belmonte and in general is that the only testimonies I've been able to glean about lighting candles in Spain, besides the images that I showed you, were from trials of new Christians, of the Anusim, whose servants ratted on them, whose servants said, the lady of the house is Judaizing, is doing Jewish practices, okay? What were her Jewish practices? She was lighting a new lamp on Friday evening with new wicks. Okay, we don't know how that lamp looked. We don't know what oil she used. That was one thing that was reported. Another thing that was reported, and this is more indicative of a Shabbat connection, is that the lamp was completely allowed to burn out. It was not extinguished. In other words, the people went to sleep and the lamp was left on, burning. So this very obviously is very congruent with Shabbat practice and was against common sense, because you don't waste fuel. You don't waste oil, and you don't waste it and just let the lamp burn when it doesn't need to burn. So that was another point in the sense of showing that this was actually a Jewish practice. And the third practice, which is in more in keeping with it, is that they would light the lamp and then they would close it up in a closet. Okay. So it was kept secret. So all we know from Spain is that they were using oil lamps, probably with new wicks on Shabbat. But more than that, I don't know. I don't know the form, and I don't know even the fuel they were using, although they might have been using olive oil, but they might have been using other things as well. So that's all I know about Spain. Now let's go to Morocco. Okay, so I said that it is they think about 20,000 Spanish Jews or Spanish and Portuguese Jews moved to Spain. And as you see, Tangier is very close to Spain. It was an easy travel. And that's the first jumping off point for all Europeans in Spain, in Morocco, was Tangiers. Okay. And as you know, also, there was an existing Jewish community in Morocco before the Jews of Spain came. They were called the Toshavim. They're an ancient Jewish community. And the Jews who came from Spain were called the Megurashim, those who had then come in from Spain. So there were two different traditions going on. And I don't know the traditions of the Megurashim at all, in all fairness. I don't know. Again, the problem with Morocco is the lack of documentation, lack of images, and lack of written texts. So where do you start? How do you start? So the first impulse was to go look at the Orientalists. And the most famous Orientalist, of course, is Eugène Delacroix. Okay, he came with a French delegation in 1832. The French had just conquered Algeria, and they wanted to have good relations with Morocco because Morocco shared a large border with Algeria. So they came in. Now, when they came, it was February, and in that particular year, it was Ramadan. So the Sultan didn't want to see them really. So they had spent a lot of time cooling their heels and looking for other things to do while they were in Morocco. And that enabled Delacroix to do quite a lot of oil painting and watercolor books, mostly watercolor sketches that he later turned into paintings. But what was important here to mention is that Tangiers was an open city. The Jews were not required to live in the Melach, in a walled Jewish compound, as they were in other cities. And there were about 2,000 Jews who lived in Tangiers. And many of them were in the service of the consulates, the European Christian consulates, because the Muslims were forbidden to work for the Christians. And the Christians needed translators. So many Jewish families served as translators for these European delegations, and one of them was the Ben Shimol family. And the translator of Delacroix's of that group was Avraham Ben Shimol. And just so happened that his daughter, and this is a shout out to Lior, his daughter was getting married while the delegation was there. Okay. So that on the 20th of Adar, not, I don't know if today's the 20th of Adar, but soon, the 20th of Adar, the Ben Shimel family celebrated a wedding, and Delacroix was there with his delegation. I also want to mention, by the way, that the delegation was constantly being chased away from Muslim women. They had much more access to Jewish women. So Delacroix, and Delacroix was fascinated with Jewish women. He thought they were beautiful. He called them the pearls of Eden. They thought Jewish men were ugly, but they loved the Jewish women. Okay. So here you see the well-known Delacroix painting Nos Juives au Maroc. Okay. Now, Delacroix is, there's been a lot of there's at least one article in the Journal of Jewish Art about this painting, and much has been written about this painting. There are definitely true ethnographic details in this painting, meaning the men and women sitting separately. The garb of the Muslims as opposed to the garb of the Jews were required to wear dark colors, for instance. The musicians, they were Jewish musicians. They were considered the best musicians for the Sultan. And this woman dancing even is a true detail, even though one researcher showed this painting to a rabbi and he said, that's impossible. No, they never had that. But Malasod, what can you do? Our aesthetics, our way of looking at things was not the way that they necessarily looked at things. Okay. And we have testimony to the fact that Jewish women did dance in public like this at certain events. Okay. What's missing? There's no lighting in this painting at all. And Delacroix writes for himself that he wasn't interested in capturing the exact details. He's not the Maritz Oppenheim here of North Africa. He's not interested in all the details. He wanted to create an avira, an atmosphere. And he wrote about it about 20 years later that he embellished or he changed things to create a certain atmosphere that he wanted to create in his painting. And that is of the Orient and the exoticism of the Orient. So I kept looking in Delacroix, but again, this is a very lovely watercolor. This is in the Musée Condé in Chantilly. A very charming watercolor. This is the Buzaglo family, an interior, a Jewish family. You see the baby in the cradle. You see the mother, maybe she's sewing here. Very charming, but no interest, no depiction of lighting at all, or Sabbath lighting in particular. So this kind of search for depictions of lighting or lamps in the homes is very difficult and didn't lead to much. So what I've discovered is basically based on objects that have survived. Okay, so there are three types of objects that were probably used for Sabbath lighting in Morocco. One is the glass lamp, the ashashit, or the kandil. And we know the word kandil. It turns out the word kandil is from Greek. Okay, it means a hanging glass lamp, a kandil, and by extension it became candle. From there it moved to candle. But in but in Arabic today it means a lamp. Kandil means a lamp. If you go into Google and you put in kandil, you'll get lighting stores in different countries, different Arab countries. So one is the hanging glass float lamp. The second type are brass candlesticks, and the third type are sheet or cast brass implements. And in the case of the second and third type, we know they were made by Jews. Okay, let's start with the ashashit, the glass lamps. So here you see, this is the only depiction I was able to find of an interior of a Jewish home, and it shows the hanging glass lamps used for lighting. So it is possible, again, I don't know, that the women in Morocco did what European precedents did and would extinguish the light and then relight it in honor of the Sabbath. This is possible. I don't have any rabbinic testimony or any testimony to this fact whatsoever. The second means is the candlestick. Now, of course, we immediately think of the candlestick as the first way you light the Sabbath candles because that's become the modern usage. Morocco, the situation is different than in Europe. Why? Because the Jews are involved in wax making and wax production and selling wax as well, as opposed to Europe, where the wax production is in Christian hands. And moreover, wax, by the way, I neglected to mention this, beeswax has Christian connotations. First of all, the softness reminds people of the flesh of Jesus. And the second thing is that bees were thought to be parthenogenic. They what's the word? Reproduced in a pure fashion, which is like the Immaculate Conception. So wax had Christian connotations. In a Muslim context, these are totally non-existent. So the reason to avoid using wax, there's no reason to avoid it, as in Europe, where there might have been a reason to avoid it. Here, these are beautiful candlesticks. They were made Jewish manufacture. These are in the Eretz Israel Museum. And they're quite tall. They're quite big, and they held quite large candles. And turns out that Morocco had quite a market. These candlesticks were made in Birmingham, but were for the Moroccan market and were donated to the Israel Museum by a Moroccan family. So they were made in a similar style to what we saw was made by hand. And the style was copied, and apparently the industrial making of brass enabled it to be maybe cheaper, less expensive, or more readily available in Morocco. Again, I have no texts that discuss this. We only know this from previous exhibits, for instance, the Morocco exhibit that was held at the Israel Museum in the late 70s. What little text I have also relates to something which is, again, discussed greatly in Ashkenaz, is how many candles, how many lights. Rambam doesn't discuss this as far as I know. One of the few Sephardi sources I found for this was in the Menorat HaMaor, where he writes, it is customary to light 2 lamps. Now he wrote here, shtei nerot. Okay, so shtei nerot, it could be 2 candles, it could be 2 lamps, or it could be 2 wicks. You could have 2 wicks in the same float lamp. We don't know. We don't know. The rabbis traditionally liked the number 2 because of echad keneged zachor, 1 for remember, is in the book of Exodus, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And the second is zachor, and the second one is shamor at Yom HaShabbat, keep the Sabbath day and keep it holy, which appears in the book of Deuteronomy. So this is traditional explanation given for 2. There are other explanations given for 2, but this is the only place I saw it in a Sephardi source. The Sephardi sources I saw talk about lighting an oil lamp. They talk about lighting lamps for Sabbath, but they don't go into any much detail about them. And this brings us to the third kind of lamp. Okay, the third kind of lamp was, as I said, were made by Jews. Jews were the silversmiths, the goldsmiths, the tinsmiths, the metal workers in Morocco and other parts of North Africa. And the reason for this is that it was considered forbidden for Muslims to make money from metalwork, in particular precious metals, but not only. And so most of the metalwork that we are going to see is made by Jews. And this is, of course, in contradistinction to what we know in Europe, where, except for Poland and certain parts of Eastern Europe, the Jews were not involved in the crafts of making the lamps that they used, or the silver goblets, or anything else that they used. Okay, Jews were not allowed to join crafts guilds. We all know this, okay? Here in Morocco, the situation is different. There are over 15 names for occupations of Jewish craftsmen who work in metal in Morocco that I've been able to catalog. And some of them are family names, just like trades names are used in Ashkenaz, so too in Morocco, such as Asayag or Tsayag, which meant metal workers or goldsmiths. So what kind of lamps were these Jewish metal workers making? So one kind, which is a more simpler kind, is a sheet brass Sabbath lamp. This is in the Israel Museum collection. And here you see it's just flat brass, flat, and it says Ladlik Ner Shabbat. So there's no question it was used for Shabbat. And there's a small oil reservoir at the bottom, and it has 2 spouts, okay? And this makes me think that at some point, the lighting of the Sabbath candles or lights, as in Europe, became symbolic because there's not a lot of oil in there. It's not a huge reservoir. How long can it stay burned? So here's an example of where the Sabbath lighting had become symbolic, also in Morocco. This lamp is a beautiful one, also from the Israel Museum collection. And here you see a different technique. This is cast brass. So it was made by a different craftsman. It's cast, as a palmetto decoration, geometric, floral, oftentimes little birds. We'll see some more birds soon. Sometimes there's a little hook here for a tool, like a pincetta to maybe, or a scissor to work the wicks. This one has 4 spouts that you see here. This one is in the music collection in the Eretz Yisrael Museum, and this only has 3 spats, okay? And again, here the oil tray is very small. We do have a multiplicity of bird motifs here. The bird can be seen as a Jewish motif, but not only, because it's also present in Islamic art. I mean, we can talk about the Sipor HaNefesh, the bird symbolizing the soul, the bird symbolizing the divine presence, but it's not clear whether it had more of a symbolic meaning or simply a decorative one. These lamps oftentimes have a pole behind that was used for hanging, and this backplate presumably protected the wall from flames, although again, the flames are very low and the oil tray is quite small. This one I brought from the Dahan collection in Brussels simply to show you the double tray here. Now, was the double tray to make more light, or was it simply had more of a technical function to catch the oil drips and catch sparks as sort of a safety feature? And I tend to think it was the latter, because we know that that same method existed in lamps in Europe. This is an oil lamp from Europe. This is in the Van Benisch collection. It's called a double Betty because it has the two, it's called a Betty lamp, but 2 trays. So the 2 trays, again, to catch, perhaps, to catch the oil and the oil drips and possibly sparks as well. Now, one of the challenges of this research is that oftentimes you see the Sabbath lamps are cataloged as memorial lamps. So I would like to make a hypothesis here about that. This is a memorial lamp in Morocco for a synagogue. It's in memory of Rabbi Raphael Memran. And it says here, his name appears here on this band. Again, this is a float lamp. It's filled with water and then oil and then lit in memory. And these lamps were donated to synagogues. And here's a photograph from the Ibn Danan synagogue in Fez, 1905, with a plethora of these lamps, okay? And they still, some of them still exist to this day, and so forth, okay? These lamps actually have a basis in Maimuna, in a Maimuna cup, which is called the Kas de Maimuna, and I apologies if I'm pronouncing it all wrong. The cup with the Maimuna glass is a symbol of the head of the household. And on Maimuna, it is filled with jewelry and oil and coins to symbolize prosperity and good luck for the coming year. Now, what's interesting, and I didn't know this, is that when the head of the household dies, the same glass is used as a memorial light, and it's put on a chair and lit on Sabbath and on Rosh Chodesh, apparently, for the entire year of mourning, and only later donated to the synagogue with the silver band around it, as you saw. So my question is, these lamps these were photographed by Yaakov Pinkerfeld and Meknes in the 1950s. These lamps that you see here, and I want to thank Maya Mosek for pointing this out to me, is that here, these lamps, they look like the Sabbath lamps that we saw, but they have the names of the women sort of punched in the back. Okay, sort of punched in here in the back. Here you see Chana, for instance. So the question is, were these donated as memorial lamps, lichatchila, or is it b'diavad? Here we see have to turn to another Orientalist to find something, a little small something. And here we see a lamp. Here you see one of these Sabbath lamps hanging in the Beit Midrash of a synagogue in Morocco. So presumably it's here as a memorial lamp. Here, of course, you see the same kind of hanging lamps we saw in Amsterdam before. And this kind of lamp with lots of oil, cups of oil hanging is also common in Morocco in general. So here we see the Sabbath and lamp in memory of Rachel Batito. So it says here in memory of the woman, Rachel Batito, may her soul be bound in the bond of life. But here on top it says Ner Mitzvah. So was this lamp redone after her death or rededicated after her death? Because Ner Mitzvah certainly seems like it's talking about Sabbath and not talking about a memorial lamp. So it raises questions, and I don't have clear answers for it because, again, and I'm hoping that this discussion will help bring some things forward to all of us when thinking about Jewish material culture. I want to conclude with a small thought, and this is something that all of us, I think, who work in the field of Jewish art think about. I just recently came across this notion of salvage poetics about texts that are written about that pre-Holocaust world, post-Holocaust, and we all know such texts. Whether it's Life is with People or it's Bella Chagall's memoirs, how can we bring that life back to life? And in the lack when there are no texts, which is a lot of what's happened with the Jews of North Africa and points east, can the objects alone bring back that culture or help us bring back that culture? And I think that one of the things that we all try to do, those of us who work in this field, is that we're trying to, in some way, understand and recreate that world, to understand what that world was like through the objects that have survived in the lack of written testimony. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for your participation today. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Great, Susan. Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. Wow, learned so much. Okay, so if anyone, any of the listeners have any questions, please, this would be a good time to maybe click on the raised hand button. See, and you mentioned Professor Sabar. Also, I'm sure he has comments. Anyone? Well, in the meantime, maybe I'll ask a question.
Okay.
The source with Zachor v'Shamor for the two candles. It's unclear to me whether it originally referred to using two candlesticks or that you're using two wicks in the individual nair, of which there then might be many nairs, but perhaps each one of them might have a double wick.
Yes. Yes. I don't know. We don't know. In other words, yes, it could be two wicks. Look, we all know that the star-shaped lamps had 6 branches. So there were clearly more, 6 to 8 branches in Ashkenaz. They're clearly more than 2 minimum. 2 is like the minimum. But it seems to me that in most communities, people did more. I think 2 was but the question is, you're right. Is it 2 vessels? Is it just 2 wicks? I don't know. And even for Ashkenaz, it's very hard for me to give you an answer on that.
Okay, I see we have a question from Ernesto.
Yes, I found it fascinating to hear about the idea that the lighting, the original lighting in the temple is not light of candles, because when we read in the Torah, there we read about that the Am Yisrael has to bring oil and a very fine oil, finest oil to light in the temple, and we don't read about candles. So this is very, I think it is very and very present idea that it could have been a lamp. And the other is a question about the symmetry of the lamp, because I saw that the symmetry is done in eight arms, and there would be the question, why is there the 8 and not 12 or 7 or 6? Is there some answer or it's an
You're talking
mystery.
about the hanging lamp of Ashkenaz now, the one that's in a circle, right?
Yes.
Okay, I will tell you why it is 8. They also, okay, everyone hold on to your seats here. They used it for Hanukkah also. They used it for Hanukkah lighting also.
Mm-hmm.
And so they decided that the branches were far enough apart that they could distinguish between the flames, and so it was used, it was acceptable to use it for Hanukkah as well. So that's why the 8 is the most common, 6 and 8, but 8 is the most common number of those.
Okay, but if it was used for Hanukkah, they kind of have a different purpose, right? Because the Ner Shabbat is that it's supposed to illuminate the Shabbat in the house, the meal, that it's supposed to bring us light. Whereas the Ner Hanukkah, the sages teach that the light is forbidden to us. The purpose of the light is for pursuing Isa that should go to the outside world, that we should have no benefit from it. So would they
You're
move
right.
it? Like they would like move it somewhere else then? So like
You know what, Lior, it's talked about by the poskim, actually very early poskim. It's a good question. But if there are some lamps, and I didn't catalog these, that have also candle holders. I don't know if you've noticed, there's some star-shaped lamps that also they added candle holders to. So it could be they sidestepped the issue. Like, for instance, we know that there are Hanukkah lamps in the lamps all have 2 extra candle holders to the side. So it could be they added light, extra light, and that's the issue. But I don't have I don't have halakha to give you on this. But who knows that they did use the circular lamps of Hanukkah. So maybe they did move. Maybe they moved it.
okay. If if I if I'm not mistaken about the candle, there are like our sources about the use of candle for Bikat Chametz. From if I'm not mistaken, the Rosh, who was from Ashkenaz but probably writing in Spain, writes about using the ner for Bikat Chametz, ner shel sha'ava.
They did, look, they did use it. It was expensive. They did use the Ner Shel Shava. I think the Ner B'dikat Chametz, I'm almost, all the depictions in the Haggadot show a Ner Shel Shava, as to the best of my knowledge. The one in the Cincinnati Haggadah and in the Ashkenazi Haggadah, they did use it. It was more expensive, so it was a special, it was a more expensive thing to have.
But then maybe the default ner would not have been that's the ner shel shava only. But a ner would then not been a ner shel shava.
Yes, you can make candles out of tallow. You can make candles out of animal fat. And they burn very quickly and they stink. You can't use them for Shabbat. They're not suitable for Shabbat, but you might use them in the week for lighting your home because it's cheap and it's cheap.
Let's see. We have any other comments from Professor Sabar? If you can unmute, can you do it now?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, Shalom, Susan, and everybody. I have a few comments. I mean, actually, I must tell you that I was planning to write an essay on the candle and lighting candles in Morocco, but I give up. I gave it to Susan to write it, and that's okay. But I have a few comments, maybe that can help you, or just to hear your opinion. First, you mentioned, I just want to make it clear that there is no lamp from the Middle Ages from Ashkenaz. I mean, I know of at least two that you probably know them. One is in the Jewish Museum in New York, and one is in a private collection in Zurich. They are both supposed to be Gothic. So I'm not sure I understand you clearly, because I'm sure you know about them.
Okay.
About Belmont. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, I will.
Okay, so I'll just answer that.
Okay.
I wrote to the Jewish Museum I wrote to the Cologne, the one in I don't know the one in Zurich. First of all, I'm not familiar with the one in Zurich, but I'm sure it's authentically old, but it might not be authentically Jewish.
Oh,
okay. The one in the Jewish Museum in New York, I wrote to Cologne and asked them, because in Jewish Museum they said it was found in a dig. It was found in Cologne. That's what it says in the Jewish Museum catalog.
It's not in Deutsch. It was found in a archaeological excavation in Deutsch, in
yes,
I think in a Jewish quarter. But that's I have all memory of this. I'm not sure.
So I wrote to Cologne and I said, can you send me? They didn't know anything about it, in short. Okay, I wrote to them. Now they have a very big project there called Mikveh. They told me they knew nothing about this lamp. It doesn't mean, Shalom, that it's not authentically Gothic, but I am not sure it is authentically
Jewish. Fine. Okay. It has the Magen David at the bottom, but it doesn't say anything, I think.
I saw it. I saw pictures of it. I didn't have a Magen David. I saw it. No.
I'll look after we finish, I'll look again and check it. And speaking about it, why you don't show the miniatures in the Sephardi Agadot of the Seder that have the lamp that is star-shaped also, like in the Sarajevo Agada? You showed only the glass lamps in the synagogues, and they are actually, I think, they are Yortzeit lamps. They are not for Shabbat. They are for the memorial lamps, and that's how the custom continued in Morocco to the present day. I mean, all these glasses that fill the synagogues in Morocco, they have names of the deceased.
Yes, I talked about that at the end. Yes, one. No, I didn't say that those were Sabbath lamps. The one in the synagogue. I just said that shows that they use that lighting. That was. I didn't say that was necessarily Sabbath lamps.
And what about the star shaped in the Sephardi Sephardi homes, in the Sarajevo Haggadah and other Haggadot?
So that I have to see. I didn't. It's not in the sister Haggadah. So the Sarajevo, I have to look at that.
Sarajevo is two lamps above the Seder table. One looks like star-shaped, and the other one is the mosque lamp, the type that you showed, like the local one, like the one that comes from local. Other notes that they have, Maimonides does speak about Ner Shel Shabbat, only in the singular, not saying that there were two or more. So I'm wondering about that, if you want to relate to that later. And I thought always the custom in Belmonte, which I've been many times actually, and they have a lamp that is exact, if you want to use it, a replica that they did there for us of a Sabbath lamp that they used during the Anisut. I thought they use one because some communities use one, like the Bukharan Jews also and others. I think Kurdish Jews, because Ladlik Ner Shel Shabbat, not in the plural. So that's what, and Maimonides also speaks about Ner Shel Shabbat. So I wonder about that issue that I was trying to solve one day, but I didn't. So I thought maybe Belmonte, they preserve the custom from the Middle Ages, that is what is mentioned in Rambam. But go ahead and check it. And maybe one more note that they have about our Atlas, the Atlas Mountains. I can tell you what they used. I mean, I don't know if it's relevant to your discussion, but they use just simple cups, which they fill with oil and they blast over. So no like something made of metal. The metal Hanukkah lamps and so on, this is import from Europe to Morocco. So that's, I think, very clear from that point of view. And I think I had another note, maybe. Oh, this is it. Yeah, that's it, I think. About the doves. The doves that they appear also on Hanukkah lamps in Ketubot, and I think they can symbolize also protection, because we know in Morocco they used for that. Until today, you can buy in the market in Marrakesh a cage with a bird and take home so that it protects the people of the house. So Hanukkah lamp and the Shabbat lamp that we're hanging at home is also maybe to protect the people in the house by using these pairs of bells. So these are my notes. This is what I had in mind.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for that, Shalom. Thank you very much.
Mm.
I think that is really my question, is that how did this special lamp move to Morocco? In other words, were they just using simple, as you said, simple vessels, simple ceramic vessels? And it could very well be that there wasn't anything special until recently. I don't know how to date the metal lamps that we have in these museum collections. No dating, really.
Yeah, but you see, if you look at the Hanukkah lamps that are done the same technique, we can see their sources in medieval Spain. So maybe it's about lighting a vessel that is used for lighting lights, either for Hanukkah or for Shabbat, that could have been imported from Spain. I mean, we know of other items that were imported from Spain and continue to be used in Morocco, in Sephardi Morocco. So
Right.
it could be also this. And you are right. We don't know for sure. We don't have any evidence.
Yes.
Hmm.
Thank you very much.
Big question. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
If that reminds me of another question I had, something that you said, Susan, about the Sabbath lamp being lit for the entire Sabbath until the end of the Sabbath. That seems to make a lot of sense, but isn't it also wouldn't it also be enough for the lamps to be just lit for just a few hours until the end of the evening meal, and then to go out, and then the next day to use natural sunlight if there's windows?
Look, it's a good question. That's why I did that experiment where I lit the lamp. I'm in the process of doing another experiment. After I do that one, we'll talk. I have another experiment I'm going to do.
I was once a guest in for a Sabbath meal in Mea Shearim by a family of Prushim, and they used some kind of I don't know, like I don't know what it's called exactly, uh, like something like for a stove, and they hung it up over their and it lit for like 3 hours or something. Made light and then went out, and that was it. And then the next day they just used the natural sunlight. Anecdote.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, Professor Casuto? Professor Casuto, you have to unmute. There.
I have a question. If the lamp has any possibility to put a glass coverture to it?
As far as I know, no.
Because it could be that, they were going to the synagogue with candles. And I asked myself if there, on Shabbos, if there was a possibility to put a cover of glass around it.
Well, they used lanterns. In other words, they might have used a lantern, which is a box,
Yes.
So I think they might have used, to walk in the street or to walk outside, they probably used a lantern that was already a box of some kind with a candle in it.
Yeah, but this specific menorah, they have no possibility of creating of it a lantern.
I don't think so. I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
It could be, by the way, I just remember another thing, that the name of the deceased woman was added later, because we know they used this as a yortzeit lamp now at home on Shabbat Moroccan Jews. So it could be that it was added either at the time that it was made in memory of the matriarch of the family, or after she passed away, it was added. There's not, again, no evidence about that because you showed a few with names of women, but there are more. I have a few more photographs, and it seems that they were added not by the original maker, so it could be that as well. And yeah, okay. And another remark that I just remembered is about the candlesticks. We know that in the towns like Tetuan, Mogador, and so on, Tangier, they imported items from Europe, including the rimonim, for example, and other ceremonial objects. So it could be that this tradition of candlesticks that is not really part of any Islamic Jewish community in the past was imported from Europe as well by the Sephardi Moroccans, like those of Mogador especially I'm thinking of. I mean, it's very typical of them to do that, to bring this type of items and either import them or create them locally based on the models that they bought from Europe. So that's something also worth checking.
Yes. Well, then, so that it's the opposite, that they were copying the Birmingham. Instead of Birmingham copying them, they were copying Birmingham.
No, that's what I'm saying. That they imported because those of Mogador, they were in touch with England and the Netherlands and so on. I mean, these businessmen of Essaouira. So they imported stuff, that's right. And they then produced locally based on it.
Could be. Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Kaval Aviva Miller is not with us to comment on all this.
What? I'm sorry?
Kaval Aviva Miller, Lancet, Zichronah Livracha, is not with us to comment on all this because she would have loved to hear your talk.
Yes. I'm sorry too. I used her catalog extensively.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was very important for. She was very, very important.
Yes.
Yes.
My first visit to Morocco was with her, so
oh wow!
About it. We were like children in a candy shop. I mean, we were so amazing. Yeah.
I bet. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Do we have any other comments, questions from the Kahal? Here, a moment. Okay. Well, in that case, it's time for us to announce next week's talk in the department. Does everyone see the flyer? Yeah. It'll be what Jews wanted to see, a Jewish museum's advocates, critics, and audiences by Jeffrey Apts. Will be our special guest next week. Everyone is invited. Mark your calendars. Same time, same place, same link next Wednesday. And will we have another talk before Pesach more, or is it?
Yes, another one. We have another one.
And then there'll be one more. Then we'll take another little break and we'll be back to continue through the semester. So thank you very much, Susan, for
תודה רבה על ההרצאה הנפלאה.
Yes, an illuminating talk. So we'll see you next time.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye for now. Bye-bye.